Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, this Friday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is presented by the Locked On Podcast Network's Ultimate Season Preview 2021. From August the 30th through September the 8th, Locked On's host and NFL experts from Odyssey are going to team up to go through every team and every division. Make sure that you follow the Ultimate Season Preview 2021 feed on the Odyssey app or whatever platform you get your podcast, and make sure to tune in starting on August 30th. But we have a lot of news to discuss on this Friday episode of the Locked On Titans podcast. First of all, a tumultuous week for the Titans, capping off with a pretty rough Thursday. It does appear that the Titans have themselves another COVID outbreak, and this one includes their starting quarterback and head coach. So I'm going to break down everything you need to know about what the Titans are going through right now. We got a statement from Titans general manager Jon Robinson. We heard some more from head coach Mike Vrabel, and because of the COVID outbreak, the Titans have been forced to make a ton of roster moves ahead of their last preseason game of the year. So I'm going to give you all the roster updates you need and make sure you have all the information you need to know. After that, the Titans did have practice on Thursday. So I'm going to break down everything you need to know from practice, including the first appearance from a very, very important depth piece for the Titans on offense. I'm going to tell you who came out to Titans practice for the first time this off season. And then the Titans do have their final preseason game of the year on Saturday night against the Chicago Bears. I'm going to preview that game for you guys, make sure you're ready to go for the last preseason game of the year. So a tumultuous Thursday for the Tennessee Titans, but we are breaking it all down on this Friday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. Let's get it.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's dive right in, Titans fans. We have a ton of news to go over, and like I said, it's not the most positive news that I want to be talking about here on a Football Friday, but it is the biggest news of the day. And first and foremost, Ryan Tannehill, the Tennessee Titans starting quarterback, has been placed on the COVID-19 reserve list. And he was not alone, but obviously he was the most important name in terms of overall team success for the Titans that was placed on the list on Thursday. Just want to break this down. Just like with head coach Mike Vrabel, a vaccinated player who tests positive for COVID-19 is required to have 2 negative tests within a 48-hour period, and then they can instantly come back into the building. An unvaccinated player has to be out 10 days minimum if they do test positive for COVID-19. So that's the same circumstances for Mike Vrabel, who is the head coach, but he's also vaccinated. But at this time, another news update for you. Mike Vrabel said on Thursday he has yet to have a negative test. So we're getting to a time period where Mike Vrabel is essentially going to have to be out the entire 10 days. He will not be coaching on Saturday night in the preseason game. He did say that he would be watching the game at home with the TV on and Titans radio blaring next to him, hearing Coach Dave McGinnis and Mike Keith in his ears. So Saturday night, you will probably relate to Mike Vrabel more than you ever have before. He's going to be watching the game just like us. But that wasn't the only news. A negative update on Mike Vrabel, negative news for Ryan Tannehill. 2 other Tennessee Titans were also placed on the COVID-19 list. Tight end Jeff Swaim, who just cannot seem to get any consistent time out on the practice field, whether it be injury or now COVID. And then also depth linebacker Justin March Lillard was added to the COVID list. Also, with Mike Vrabel being out, we talked about Craig Ackerman, the special teams coordinator, being the pseudo and acting head coach. Well, after missing practice the last 2 days and people asking questions, comes to pass that Craig Ackerman also has been affected by COVID-19. He's not been in the building, whether it be a close contact or a positive test for himself. Either way, Craig Ackerman will not be there. So the Titans head coach, their backup head coach, are both not going to be available for this preseason game. So now, if you're keeping score at home, that's 9 Tennessee Titans employees that are dealing with COVID in some way. Craig Ackerman and Mike Vrabel as coaches, and then 7 players: Ryan Tannehill, Jeff Swain, Justin March Lillard, Jeremy McNichols, Nick DeZumnar, Anthony Rush, and Harold Landry. And that is enough players. That's 9 people of the organization to be considered quite a large outbreak. And as we know, the Titans dealt with maybe the largest outbreak of the season last year as well. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm just weary from it all. I'm worn down by the COVID news. I want to talk about football. I want to play football. But the reality is, we still are in the midst of the pandemic, and it's been affecting the Titans more than it seems to have affected other teams. And while you can never fault anyone for getting sick during a pandemic, at some point in time, we do have to ask ourselves why this is a pattern, why the Titans seem to be having large outbreaks anytime it does affect them, and why it's happened multiple times. Maybe you're somebody who thinks it's not a pattern, it's coincidence, it's just luck, it's just the luck of the draw, it's just something that happened. But my brain is just inclined to ask questions. And with the dinner that the Titans had on Saturday night, although sources report that nobody at that dinner was someone who tested positive, it still just leaves us to wonder why this seems to be affecting the Titans a little bit more often than your average team around the NFL, at least purely a numbers game. The Titans have these major outbreaks with close to double-digit problems, and you can only ask yourself questions. You can never have exact answers when these things happen, but it just makes you wonder. And quite frankly, posing that question had a lot of you guys very upset with me on Twitter on Thursday. But either way, all I can do is just ask questions and say what's on my mind. But moving forward, out of the COVID problem, that creates roster problems for the Titans as they try to get down to the 53 and as they try to field a team for the last preseason game. And to deal with all of the roster issues, the Titans signed 3 players on Thursday. Running back Javion Hawkins out of Louisville, who the Titans actually visited with before the draft. He's an undrafted free agent from this year. Linebacker Cash Malua, and then defensive back Nate Brooks. Now, I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys. None of these guys are going to make the team. They're not going to be on the Titans for more than a couple of days when the Titans cut down the roster to 53 next week. So, not going to spend a lot of time here going into these guys' history. They're just not going to be on the team much longer. But the reality is here, the biggest news is the COVID outbreak. I do want to say that John Robinson did mention that 97 to 98% of the Titans roster right now is vaccinated. And while that is a good thing, obviously it's not preventing them from having COVID outbreaks. And I'm not going to wade into the societal debate around the virus and everything like that and how it's handled. All I know is we would all like to see the Tennessee Titans win as many football games as possible and maybe win a Super Bowl. And maybe some additional extra precautions need to be put in place. Maybe the Titans need to go above and beyond just the NFL and NFLPA protocol to ensure safety. Now, I'm not guaranteeing that even if they did that, it would prevent something like this. But you got to think with comments like from Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach Bruce Arians saying, my players are not allowed to go out on the road. They have to stay in their hotel. That's not an agreed upon protocol. Bruce Arians is putting that in addition to the protocols. Maybe the Titans have to consider something like that as we get closer to the regular season. Again, it doesn't mean that this isn't going to happen, but obviously the Titans are just in a tough spot. I don't have a lot of answers on how to fix it, but just anything that they can do extra, hopefully those precautions and those extra steps are being taken. So not the greatest news to lead off a Friday show with, not what I want to be talking about. Quite frankly, I want to talk ball, but it is the biggest Titans news of the day, and all of the attention from the NFL and their fan bases are going to be on the Titans again for things that we don't really like to see. So I hope all of those people, regardless of the football, get back healthy and aren't affected long term. But either way, that is the situation the Titans are dealing with. If all goes according to plan and these guys get back to health within the 10-day period, none of these players should be affected for week one. But we are going to talk some football next. Going to talk about Titans practice on Thursday, which was officially the last practice of training camp. Before we get into that, do want to tell you guys about the best tasting protein bar ever from our friends over at BuiltBar.com. Built Bar is celebrating freedom of choice. They have 12 delicious flavors that you can choose from on their website right now. They have something for everyone, and every flavor, every bar is what is covered in 100% chocolate. I'm not on a diet or any kind of health regimen or anything like that. And I like eating the Built Bars just as a candy bar because they're so delicious, but they are healthy for you as well. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. Make sure that you go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your first order at builtbar.com. Once again, LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Let's actually talk some football, Titans fans. We're going to go over Tennessee Titans practice on Thursday, the last practice of Titans training camp. Before we get into that, do want to take an opportunity and just remind you guys, I'm going to be putting out daily, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content here on the Locked On Titans podcast, not only during the preseason, not only during the regular season, but all year long. Make sure you never miss an episode of the #1 Tennessee Titans podcast in the world by subscribing to the Locked On Titans podcast on whatever platform you stream podcasts. And make sure that you subscribe to the Locked On Titans YouTube page. Smash that notification bell so you never miss when an episode goes live. I'm fully recovered health-wise, so I will have an instant reaction video up for you guys on Saturday night. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to do just a full-length 30-minute episode for you guys after the game on Saturday night, so make sure that you check that out. Also, check me out on Twitter at TicTacTitans. Check out the Facebook page for the show at Locked On Titans Pod. But Titans practice, the biggest headline. Yesterday, I went over my 53-man roster projection, and I begged to get this player back healthy, and it is interior offensive lineman Aaron Brewer, the undrafted free agent from 2020, filled in for Roger Saffold as a starter when Saffold was out for the regular season matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. In spot duty last year, while the Titans dealt with some issues on the offensive line, I thought Aaron Brewer was fantastic for being an undrafted free agent. I was really high on him coming into the year, thinking that if the Titans have their 3 starters and Aaron Brewer, that's all they need on the interior offensive line, and then they can focus on having 5 offensive tackles. So really nice to see Aaron Brewer make his first appearance of training camp at Titans practice. He has passed his physical. He is off the non-football injury list. Love to see that. So, some rough news to start the show, but that's a positive news as well. Now, the Titans who did not participate in practice included Josh Reynolds, who's been really struggling with an Achilles injury. Talked about how the Titans could manipulate the IR situation to get him on the roster and still keep 6 of the other wide receivers as well. Dane Cruikshank, the guy just is always hurt. He's just always hurt, and I don't see how he's going to make the roster if he cannot practice or play at all. Darrington Evans still struggling with the hamstring injury. Brady Breeze at safety. Chris Jackson at cornerback. Jayon Brown was injured in practice yesterday, slammed his helmet, got up, but he returned to practice, but he did not practice on Thursday, and it's probably just precautionary there. Christian DeLauro, the backup left tackle, I think he's done a okay job in preseason, didn't practice. Ty Sambrilo, another offensive lineman as well. Roger Saffold, more of a rest day for the veteran. And then more big news on the roster. A guy who yesterday I predicted would make the 53-man roster. It's not going to be the case. And it's defensive lineman Kyle Pecco, who I thought was set to be the backup nose tackle for Tyir Tart, has been impressive in camp. Unfortunately, he was injured at some point in time during camp, and he has been placed on IR. And remember the difference between injured reserve in the preseason and injured reserve in the regular season. In the regular season, you can return from injured reserve. If you get placed on IR in the preseason, you're out for the year. So unfortunately, Kyle Peko, I thought he was going to be a very important fifth interior defensive lineman for the Titans. They will have to look elsewhere now. And with Anthony Rush on the COVID list currently, that leaves you with Woodrow Hamilton or the undrafted free agent Naquan Jones. And quite frankly, I don't think Naquan Jones is ready for that role. Woodrow Hamilton has been the worst of the veteran interior defensive linemen outside of Anthony Rush and, of course, Kyle Peko. So that's unfortunate, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Titans actually scoop somebody up. A ton of guys are going to get cut at the beginning of next week from other teams. And there are other teams who have more depth and more talent at the interior defensive line spot than the Titans do, similar to how the Titans have a lot of talent at wide receiver. And we're going to see some Titans wide receivers get scooped up immediately by other teams. I would look for the Titans to actually scoop up and take somebody who was cut from a different team with an excess of talent than actually signing any of the guys that are currently in-house. Remember, that is a big possibility for the Titans, that some of the guys who make the roster will be guys from other teams that got cut, not necessarily guys that were in Titans training camp. Chester Rogers did return after missing a few days of practice at wide receiver. David Long, the linebacker, did leave practice early. Hopefully that's nothing serious. And then just an interesting tidbit here. Danico Autry actually worked out with the outside linebackers today instead of the defensive line. The Titans want to use his position versatility, but I'm a little bit skeptical about Danico Autry having the explosiveness at 31 and at his size to play outside linebacker, actually. I mean, I could see him rushing off the edge in a sub package with just 4 down linemen, but I don't think that he should be working as an outside linebacker. I don't think that makes a lot of sense personally. But also do want to mention Sam Kickin' Fickin' Nashville Hot Chicken went 7 for 7 on the day in practice. He's now 60 for 67 in his time in training camp with the Titans. Fickin is your 2021 starting kicker. But that is your Thursday practice recap here on the Locked On Titans podcast. We are going to move forward and preview Saturday night's final preseason game taking place in Nashville against the Chicago Bears. Before we do that, though, do want to remind you guys about the fastest and easiest way to bet on all the football action this fall, and that's our friends over at BetOnlineag. You get all the updated props, contests, and odds at betonline.ag. And speaking of contests, 2 awesome contests that they have going. The biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest are both open right now at betonline.ag. Also, they have an awesome promo running for opening day, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Dallas Cowboys on kickoff Thursday night. If you use the promo code NFL100, even if you lose your bet on that football game, they'll refund you up to $25. So they're going to give you your money back even if you lose using promo code NFL100. But that's not the only promo code I'm going to give you to get you some free money at betonline.ag. Use the promo code Locked On. That's one word, Locked On, when you sign up at betonline.ag. And when you make your first deposit, they're going to give you a 100% welcome bonus, literally matching your deposit dollar for dollar. So it doesn't matter whether it's football, basketball, boxing, or even Vegas casino games. Make sure you go to betonline.ag, use the promo code Locked On, and get ready for an awesome football season. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. We are going to cap off this Friday edition of the Locked On Titans podcast, breaking down everything you need to know before the Titans take on the Chicago Bears on Saturday night. Before we get into that, just want to tell you guys where you can get the best information possible to place the best wagers possible on betonline.ag, and that is on the Locked On Bets podcast, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. You get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favored picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day. make sure that you follow the Locked On Bets podcast on whatever platform you do stream. That's the Locked On Bets podcast presented by BetOnlineag. But let's dive into this preview for the Titans preseason game against the Chicago Bears. Number one, got to watch that backup quarterback spot. And I got some news for you guys. Feels good. Matt Barkley is getting the start on Saturday night. I had somebody say to me last Saturday night when arguing about Matt Barkley versus Logan Woodside, a Titans content creator, who said Logan Woodside isn't competing for a job. They took Logan Woodside out after 2 series against the Bucs because his roster spot's secure. I don't know about that, buddy. No. Matt Barkley's getting a start because this is a dead heat competition. And Logan Woodside got put back into that game after a couple series from Matt Barkley that resulted in points anyway. So nonsense to say Logan Woodside has a roster spot secured on this team. That's just absolutely ridiculous to say something like that. Even further proven by the fact Matt Barkley is going to get that start. And in my opinion, Matt Barkley is the leader in the clubhouse right now. He has been better throughout the preseason. The Titans offense has looked better with Matt Barkley out there, and Matt Barkley has real NFL experience. Not going to beat the dead horse as I have throughout the weeks of training camp, but either way, Matt Barkley going to be your starter on Saturday night. Obviously, Ryan Tannehill not going to be able to play as he is on the COVID-19 list, but my next question is, outside of that backup quarterback competition, how many starters will play for the Titans offense? To this point, all 5 of the Titans starters on the offensive line are the presumed starters, including Kendall Lamb at right tackle. You guys know the other 4. Haven't played a single down in preseason. So will the Titans offensive line starters actually play? What about AJ? What about Julio? Are any of these guys, Derrick Henry, are any of these guys actually going to play? I feel like it would be kind of crazy for them not to play any full-go competitive football whatsoever against another team before week 1. That's just a little shocking to me. I personally don't think that that's the right way to go. I think these guys need to get hit. They need to go up against a different team and get a real live game feel before that first opening week game. But hey, whatever Mike Vrabel and the organization decides to do, that's what they're going to do. But to me, a little risky to do that. Another question is Aaron Brewer going to be able to play? He just came off NFI, had 1 practice. I would be pretty shocked if Aaron Brewer actually played in the game. But again, are you going to get a look at Aaron Brewer before you decide on roster cuts? Or do they just feel comfortable enough with Aaron Brewer already from what they saw last year that they don't need to see him in practice? As long as he's healthy and he's on the roster, we're keeping Aaron Brewer. I certainly hope that's the case, but will be interesting to see if he gets any run out there. And then finally, on the offensive side of the ball, that wide receiver battle. Is Racey McMath going to get any offensive snaps in this game or just special teams? How does Des Fitzpatrick look as he's kind of had some positive momentum throughout this week of practice, starting with that touchdown catch last weekend? While we're talking about rookies, the defensive rookies, Caleb Farley, Elijah Molden, Rashad Weaver, I just want to see them play. I just love watching them play. Monty Rice, just going to see how those guys perform. And then my one other question on defense is, how about Danico Autry? Danico Autry is yet to play even a snap in a preseason game. He's on a new team with the Titans and a new system. Are they going to get him any run before the season? I don't know. That is something to watch for on Saturday night. The last thing that I want to talk about here isn't really a Titans point, but I'm a football fan. I want to watch Justin Fields. Justin Fields is going to be the starter for the Bears on Saturday night. Andy Dalton's not playing. Justin Fields is probably going to play the entire first half. And it'll be exciting to watch a young quarterback, as a football fan, watch him play and get real run out there. So how the Titans defense deals with Justin Fields, that'll be very fun to watch as well. But that's my preview for you guys of what's taking place on Saturday night in the Titans' last preseason game. I want to take a moment here. This is week 2 of doing the show on YouTube, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from you guys. Not always the greatest feedback, but a lot of it mostly positive. I just want to say thank you. As I've mentioned throughout, I'm working through the kinks. There's some audio issues here and there, some video issues here and there. I'm aware of this stuff, guys. I know. I'm not unaware that there are, some blips here and there in the audio where it gets loud and the quality cuts. I'm working on these things. I'm working through my process, working through getting everything as smooth as possible as we get into the regular season. I just wanted to say thank you all so very much for the support, for your constructive criticisms as well. I'm not somebody who digs my head in the sand and doesn't want to hear what anybody has to say. I'm going to listen to what you guys have to say because at the end of the day, this isn't just my show, it is our show. I feel very connected to the fan base. I'm not one of these big time reporters looking down at everybody, acting like I know more than all of them. We're in this together. I'm a fan of this team as well. So I appreciate all of you guys, all the feedback that you've been giving me. Appreciate all the support as well. Up to close to 300 subscribers. The podcast numbers, just the audio version, are through the roof right now. I can't tell you guys how much I really do appreciate it. So thank you. I will be back with you guys on Saturday night. I'm going to record a podcast right after the game to get you guys ready for the week ahead, and I can't wait to watch the Titans play again. But hope you guys all have a safe and enjoyable weekend. I will be back with you guys again as always. I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.